Well, review session just wrapped up, and I want to start off by saying that I was wrong. This was an intermission, not a chapter. I am sorry for not providing accurate information in my rain check review. But as far as review session itself is concerned, I was willing to be convinced of this ship, and this intermission sure convinced me of something, but it might not be what you expect. But in order to get into all that, we gotta go down the events of this thing. Paulo has given up on his and Daisy's new relationship, upset about having to study. Daisy insists that they do this to bring his grades up and uses his own words against him, specifically the one line that I actually really liked from Rain Check, and Paulo briefly perks up at this before falling back into his doubt. He puts his foot down on schooling though, letting Daisy know that he's really not going to college and she's going to have to be okay with that. He does assure her he is still going to try, he's taking a new job over the summer, and even admits they're going down different paths and Daisy is going to have to accept that too. This is interesting. It's pretty much what I said in the Rain Check review, and I'm glad to see that on a certain level, Teshi and I are in agreement about this. However, Teshi seems to be optimistic about them working out, as where I don't see things lasting. Or is she optimistic about this? Daisy says she's okay with this, but her face tells a different story. It's clear that Paulo following a similar path to her is important. In college material, we see her worry about Paulo deciding not to go to college, and Augustus understands her concern, as she just wants Paulo to do well. The thing is, Paulo can still do well without going to college. In the United States, there's a massive emphasis on college meaning success, and I think this is something Daisy has taken to heart. However, while Paulo is willing to accept this about his life, Daisy is unwilling to do so, to his annoyance. Daisy throws this back in his face, telling him that she's always studying and he should be willing to do this if he wants to spend time with her. She also claims she spends 60% of her free time with books. Yeah, she really seems like she's willing to compromise. Totally cool way to put the ground rules for this relationship. And keep in mind, there isn't like a little part of Paulo that enjoys reading or studying. He actively dislikes it. So her stating that most of her hobbies include reading isn't exactly grounds for a forthcoming successful relationship. This line right here is a massive red flag for Paulo. And this line here, along with the last few pages, really had me start thinking of a new possibility for the Paisley arc, but we'll get to all that soon enough. Paulo relents and goes back to his book. He points out that this sort of thing is why he thought Abby and Daisy were going to get married, because Abby actually likes studying in books. Gee, it's like this whole intermission was made preemptively to respond to my review or basically any concerns about this ship. I'll talk more about that later though. Daisy teases Paulo about her spending time with Abby instead, and he gets all blushy and makes a dumb face, and Daisy laughs and they both smile. If I were in Paulo's shoes, if Paulo wore shoes, I wouldn't be smiling about this entire conversation. And like how things usually go with Paulo and Daisy, they start talking about Abby. Man, they love talking about this guy. He's their favorite subject. Like half of their conversations are about Abby. Maybe they should just have Abby join the relationship if they love him so much. And I mean, keep this in mind, Paulo has kissed Abby more times than he has kissed Daisy. So Paulo starts giving a shit about how Abby will feel about his and Daisy's new relationship, and like, really? You're all friends at this point, so would he really get that upset? And even if he does, it's none of his concern what you two do with each other. Daisy doesn't want to hurt Abby either and wants things to stay professional at school, at least for now. Paulo teases about not making out in front of Abby, and Daisy doesn't want them to make out at all. Paulo puts on the old Paulo charms, and for one brief moment, he's finally back, baby.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about.
But upon seeing Daisy's expression, he relents and backs down. Also, if I had a nickel for every time Paulo suggested he become a monk, I'd have 2 nickels. And yeah, I do have a thing or two to say about Paulo's wishy-washiness this chapter, but we'll get to that soon enough. Daisy asks if Paulo would really want to make out with someone like her, which is a weird question considering they're supposed to be in a relationship now, and Paulo's reaction is very interesting. He doesn't respond in any sort of confident way that would imply that it was obvious that he would want to. He seems unsure about it, the whole thing is weird. He puts his book down and asks Daisy bluntly if she wants to do it right now, and as we know, Daisy is no stranger to making out in the library, but she refuses. This then leads her to realize that she can make out with Paulo, who starts to look uncomfortable about the whole thing. It's made even worse that Daisy starts freaking out over this fact, laughing and claiming that she's so lucky, and fawns over Paulo being her boyfriend, that he picked her. This makes Paulo further uncomfortable, and I'm going to keep it real with you. It kind of makes me feel uncomfortable too, and it's also pretty pathetic given the circumstances. Keep in mind that not only was Daisy never Paulo's first choice, he dated and flirted with so many girls before her, so him picking Daisy after years upon years is nothing for her to be patting herself on the back for. It's literally that meme with the guy who celebrates despite coming in third place, but instead of third place, it's like 50th place, and the only reason it's not 51st is because one of the contestants left the match. And personally, if a girlfriend acted like this towards me, I would be really concerned. This is like obsession, and we'll talk more about that later. Daisy calms down and remembers they're supposed to be keeping the relationship on the down low, despite Lucy knowing and James and Mike highly suspecting and Abby probably also expecting it. Paulo assures her that it's all good and they can take their relationship at whatever speed Daisy wants, which seems to range from we need to be as Christian about this as possible to let's fuck right here on the library table, depending on the panel. And then Paulo drops another pretty smooth line, but the rest of this intermission is brought down so much that it's not really something that almost saves anything. It's just a nice line. And also, while we're on the topic of things I liked about this intermission, I thought this scary math book gag was pretty funny. The math symbols make a frowny face on the cover. Daisy makes the same face she did just a few pages ago, which sort of lessens the impact of it, and she falls beside herself with how romantic Paulo is and how he's supposed to be discouraging them making out, and they haven't even kissed. They went through all of this shit for months and they still haven't even kissed? What? I'm not saying you have to be making out right out of the gate, but given how much these two supposedly want each other, not even a peck? Like, what is going on? What kind of a relationship is this unless... Anyway, they decide to keep things on the down low until they decide to tell Abby, which I already said was stupid, so let's move on. And they both seem upset about this too, even though they're doing this to themselves, and also they can just hang out outside of school and do non-school things and make out there and... Oh wait. They can't do this because they don't have anything in common that they could do. But Daisy has a big brain idea and gives Paulo a sussy face, and they hold hands as the punchline for the intermission. Yeah, you know what? You're right. If people saw you holding hands, they definitely won't think you're in a relationship. I mean, at least hold hands underneath the table. Do you think people are stupid? They're gonna see this and think, nah, Mike, there's no way they're a couple. Just good friends that hold hands while studying. Cool. There's a lot to unpack here, so where do I even start? I guess we can start with the concept of this intermission itself. Not that I think Teshi should write this comic for me, but this was really the opportunity to convince people why this relationship will work. But all I got here were even more red flags than I saw before, and hell, some of the red flags I did see were made even redder. At the start, I thought this intermission was made to address any concerns people might have over the two being together, and this wouldn't be the first time Teshi has used a follow-up intermission to explain away plot holes or answer questions. And conceptually, if you have to make an intermission to do that, then it's not really indicative of a well built up story. If you have to immediately follow up a story decision with lampshading and a damage control intermission, that might say more about your writing than the audience. But this intermission is not that. I mean, it kind of is, and then it's not. In fact, I believe that Teshi is actually setting up a pretty somber arc for Paulo and Daisy. She has to be. I mean, nobody writes a relationship this poorly that isn't setting up for them to break up soon. And say what you will about Mike and Lucy, but you really do get that they love each other. This just feels like two people giving off vibes that things aren't gonna work out. Like, seriously, if one of my friends came to me for advice on an interaction they had with a new girlfriend that went just like this, I'd tell them that it probably won't work out. Paulo has such little spine here that he doesn't even feel like the guy that I think Daisy fell in love with. He just backs down on everything. He's completely letting her lead the relationship, and Daisy seemingly is not really willing to compromise. Paulo is supposed to be suave, to be adverse to awkward situations, and doesn't really let shit bother him. Younger Paulo wouldn't even have given a fuck about what Abby thought of him and Daisy being together. Is that really going to be the bit going forward? This whole relationship that was built up for 18 years is just going to be kept a secret until whenever? We aren't even going to see the fruits of the arc because of Abby? Why does their entire friendship and now relationship revolve around this guy? Who the hell cares? Wasn't this what their entire conversation in Unspoken Rule was about? Not giving a shit what Abby thinks about them? I get that they're all on better terms now, but that even further proves why they shouldn't be worried about him, even after Abby has shown that he's over getting upset at the idea of Daisy hanging out with people he doesn't like. This just feels like a contrived plot point to create pointless drama that nobody is going to believe. Maybe the fallacy of Paulo and Daisy believing the worst in Abby is the point, but you can't have them believe this while also showing they don't care what he thinks. Like I said, so many people know and suspect this already, and shit, I'll throw Augustus in there too because there's no way Lucy isn't gonna rub this one in his face. It also feels like Daisy is way more into Paulo than Paulo is into her. He looks uncomfortable with her the whole time, and whenever he throws her a bone, he looks regretful immediately. Daisy just freaks out over him like she's won some great prize, and Paulo is just like whatever about them. It is obsession, dude. It feels more like Daisy likes the idea of being chosen by Paulo than actually being with Paulo. I don't know, Daisy is just coming off as really shallow here. It kind of echoes my previous sentiments of them being in love with the other's successes more than being in love with the person themselves. Like, they're more in love with the idea of the person. This is probably because they have nothing in common. This was the perfect opportunity to show them doing something fun together outside of school that was just for them, and instead it's just them studying. Great. This is not the opposites attract trope, and if that was the idea, it wasn't very well executed. This is opposites attract, a try-hard and a not try-hard enough character. Their flaws are what makes them opposites. Yes, Daisy is very successful, and I'm sure she tries very hard, but this is never presented as a flaw for her. Opposites attract is a personality thing. Think every romantic comedy ever. A great example of this trope is a fun little rom-com from 1999 called Blast from the Past. Brendan Fraser plays a guy who grew up in a 1960s fallout bunker surrounded by 1960s culture and comes to the surface in 1999 and ends up meeting a woman who is kind of a punk that doesn't trust a lot of people. She's rude and sarcastic. Throughout the story, Brendan Fraser shows her that life isn't so bad and that people can be trusted through his proper and goofy mannerisms. It thaws her heart and allows her to open up, and because of this, she falls in love with him. That is opposites attract. This is nothing. This makes me feel nothing. These two have negative chemistry with each other. There's nothing about this that feels natural. It's so forced and uncomfortable. Teshi has to know this. I refuse to believe this isn't purposeful. She has shown time and time again she knows how to write romantic chemistry, and this is not it. Someone once asked me what would be the thing to stop me from reading this comic and giving up on all of it, and I really didn't have an answer at the time, but I'm gonna be honest with you. Paisley has brought me to DEF CON 2. If this is truly meant to be a relationship that's supposed to last, then Teshi has completely and utterly failed it, and it was one of the two things she was supposed to get right. I can accept that BCB is a bumpy journey, but she has to get Paisley right, because if she can't, what hope is there for Mike and Lucy?